June 15, 0600 through June 16 at FOB Darak, the morning after an operation has a specific texture. Not celebratory. Not desolate. Something in between, in the compound morning of people who have been awake for 22 hours and are running on the operational residue that keeps a body functional past the point where it should have stopped, and who are trying to determine, in the ordinary acts of coffee and equipment staging and the first conversation of the new day, what shape the world has now versus the shape it had before. I have been awake since 04:30 the previous day. I am at my bunk and not in it, sitting on its edge with my boots finally off, a small concession to the body, the minimum viable acknowledgement that I am human and not just a function, writing the last lines of the personal log entry I started outside the Combs tent. The official report is submitted. Preliminary, flagged for debrief annotation, transmitted at 0411. The official report says what happened in the language official reports use, which is the language of outcome and timeline and systems performance, which is accurate and is also the shell of the thing rather than the thing. I submitted it. I will not look at it again for a while. In my personal log I write, June 15th. He's alive. The interpreter. 40 kilometers north and, now here and, alive, which is why the operation existed, which is the whole point, and somehow the whole point is not the part that has been occupying the most space in my head since 0500 yesterday. I write, I keep thinking about the thumbtack. The one that wasn't level. On the satellite image in the briefing room. I have been back to that room twice since last night and, both times the thumbtack is still not level and, both times I have not straightened it, and I am not sure whether that is laziness or whether it has become, in my private taxonomy of this place, a reference point I am not ready to lose. Some wrongnesses become orientation. The formal debrief was called for 0900. At 0845, I was in the briefing room for the third time in 24 hours. The room had been reconstituted, fresh maps, new satellite images, the evidence of the previous day's operation filed away in the specific administrative neatness that military institutions perform after events, as if clean surfaces constitute an emotional accounting. As if putting things in folders completes the record. The thumbtack was still not level. I was in my corner. At 0852, Captain Aldrich arrived. He was Colonel Holt's captain. The geometry problem jaw. The careful eyes. He came in alone, without Holt, and placed a folder on the table with the precise placement of a man who has been given a specific task and is performing it with precision because precision is what he has to offer in the absence of the authority that should have accompanied him. Nobody said anything about the absence. Rosales acknowledged Aldrich. Guerrero, already seated, looked at the door once and, then, looked at the map. The DIA attaché was not present. Two of Voss's senior operators were at the far end of the table. Sergeant Major Okafor was against the wall, arms crossed, in the posture of a man who has heard everything that will be said in this room before and is here to note which version of it this particular room will choose. Voss arrived at 0858. She looked like someone who has not slept and has made a complete peace with not sleeping. This is different from the look of someone who is exhausted. Exhaustion is passive, it is what happens to you. What Voss had was the look of someone who has taken the absence of sleep and folded it into the operational picture and continued. She sat. She put her tablet on the table. She looked at Aldrich with a look that was not accusatory and was not gracious and was the look of a person who has noted the composition of the room and filed it accurately and is ready to proceed with the room as it is rather than as it should have been. Captain Aldrich, she said. Commander. He opened his folder. Colonel Holt sends his, we'll start, she said. Aldrich closed his folder. Or partly closed it. The inch it took to understand he was done with that sentence. She ran the debrief the way she ran everything. Economy. 22 minutes covering the insertion, the route, the contact, the alternate extraction, the wounded operator's status stable, medevac at 0300, expected to return to duty in 6 weeks, which Voss stated without the inflation of relief or the deflation of apology, stated it as fact, as the precise outcome of a decision made and a route taken and a team that executed. The mission objectives achieved. The interpreter, alive, in medical care, preliminary debrief conducted, full intelligence debrief scheduled. The signals flag at 2149 noted, incorporated, functionally decisive. She looked at me when she said functionally decisive. Not for long. A second. I wrote it in my notebook and then looked at the page and realized it was the first thing I had written in the official notebook since the night before. Everything else was in the black one. There was a moment in the debrief, one moment where the surface and the subterranean ran close enough together that I could hear both. Voss was covering the alternate route decision. The tactical language of it, the risk calculus, the timeline impact. She was clinical about it, the way she was clinical about all of it, and then, she said, the decision to go back for Lima element was not a deviation from doctrine. It was the doctrine. My team does not leave an accounting gap. Accounting gap. Not a military term I recognized. Not in the doctrinal literature I'd read in preparation for this assignment. A term she had coined, or a term she had carried here from somewhere else, from some other room, some other debrief, some other moment when the math of acceptable margins had needed to be renamed so it could be refused. I wrote it in the black notebook. Nobody else wrote it down. I looked at Guerrero, who was looking at Voss, and Guerrero's face had that expression again, the confirmation of something held for a long time, and, for a moment the two of them were in a room within the room that the rest of us could see but not enter. Then, Voss moved on to communications performance, and the room settled back into its single register. The debrief ended at 0934. People dispersed with the efficiency of the morning after, tasks to complete, reports to file, the machinery of an operation that had concluded successfully generating its documentation. Aldrich left first, with the folder and the specific walk of a man returning to report a room he had not controlled. Rosales had already begun a new set of arrows on the whiteboard for something that had nothing to do with us. The operators filed out. I was staying to finalize my annotation for the official debrief record. At 0947, Guerrero stopped beside my corner on her way out. She looked at my notebook. Not at me. At the notebook, as if she could read through the cover. How many notebooks, she said. Almost 3. She nodded. The nod of a person confirming a fact they suspected. Make sure the right one survives, she said. And left. I sat with that for a while. I am still sitting with it. At 11:30, I needed a signature. The intelligence annex required a command authority signature on my operational source assessment, a bureaucratic nothing, the administrative machinery of documentation that proceeds regardless of what happened the night before or what the rooms around it contain. I was told Commander Voss was at equipment staging and to go there directly. I went to equipment staging. She was alone. Her team had cleared the staging area 20 minutes before. What was left was Voss doing the last personal equipment check herself, the same methodical attention she had brought to the pre-op staging, the same economy of movement. She was kneeling by an open hard case, checking something inside it that I didn't have a name for. I said, Commander. The source assessment needs a command signature. She looked up. Give it here. I handed her the document. She read it, actually read it, not the skim and sign that constitutes reading for most people in most rooms, and signed it and handed it back. I should have said thank you and left. I did not say thank you and left. I said, the entry in your fitness report. She looked at me. The last line, I said. Commander Voss requires no elaboration. She was quiet for a moment. You accessed my file, she said. Yes, ma'am. Authorized query, adjacent purpose. Another moment. What about it, she said. And then, I said the thing I had not planned to say, the thing that had been in my notebooks for 36 hours without finding its way out. I'd been trying to figure out whether that's the highest thing they could say about a person, or whether it's what they say when they don't want to do the work of actually saying it. The equipment staging was quiet. The morning had gotten warm already, the FOB finding its operational temperature for the day, and outside I could hear vehicles and rotors and the ambient noise of a base continuing to function. In here it was just us and the hard case and the signed document in my hand. She looked at me for long enough that I considered apologizing. Then, she said, both. One word. Not an explanation. Not an elaboration. The period that is also a door, the one that opens onto a room you have to find your own way into. She turned back to the equipment case. I stood there for a moment. I said, the alternate route. You built it in the first 5 minutes of the mission brief. Yes. Because you already knew something would move. Because something always moves, she said. The question is whether you've already decided what you'll do when it does. She closed the hard case. The room at 0500, I said. She looked up again. The look of a person wondering how far this is going. You let him think you were staff, I said. You let the whole room think whatever it thought. She was quiet. Why? She considered the question the way she considered everything, without waste, without performance, with the full seriousness it deserved. Then, she said the thing that I did not write in my official notebook, that I wrote in the black one, that I have not read back to myself since writing it because I am not sure I am ready yet for what it means. I stopped spending myself on rooms that haven't earned it. I used to. Cost too much. Now I let rooms be wrong about me, and I watch what the room does with being wrong, and that tells me everything the room's official record never will. She picked up the hard case. You took good notes, she said. Use them correctly. She left equipment staging. I stood there with the signed document in my hand and my pen in my other hand and nothing written on anything, because for once I could not move fast enough from the hearing to the writing, because some sentences arrive so complete that the act of writing them feels like the first damage done to them. I stood there. I wrote nothing. I went back to the briefing room at 1300. I did not have operational reason to be there. I went because it was the room where it began and I had not finished with it yet, or it had not finished with me, and sometimes the only way to close a room is to go back inside and take the last measure of it. The whiteboard was covered in Rosellas's new arrows. The satellite images had been replaced with new ones. The folding chairs had been rearranged for whatever the next thing was. I looked at the windowsill. The cup was gone. Someone had removed it between last night and this morning. Cleaning crew, probably, or Rosellas doing his pre-brief ritual of putting the room in order. It was gone. The windowsill was clean. There was nothing to show that a cup had been placed there by a woman who had gone into a wall and come off it and picked up the cup and set it on the sill with that specific, measured care and left it there and walked to the birds and gone north 40 kilometers in the dark and come back with 14 people and one man who needed to still be alive. Nothing. Just the windowsill. The thumbtack was still not level. I looked at it for a moment. I reached out and straightened it. I don't know why. Some wrongnesses are orientation and some have done their work and can be set right, and the hard part is knowing which is which. I stood there for a moment after, looking at the now level thumbtack, and the room looked almost identical to how it had looked before except for that one small correction, and I could not tell if the correction had fixed something or only made visible that the thing that mattered had already been removed. Voss's element departed at 1600. I was at my terminal processing the final intelligence annotation when Sergeant Major Okafor appeared in the TOC doorway and said, without preamble, "Commander's element is rolling in 10. The notification that produces movement in certain people, the kind of movement that is not official and is not required and involves them finding reasons to be in the vicinity of the departure area, which is a thing that happens when a commander has done something that the people around her do not have the official language for. I had administrative reason to be at the vehicle staging area. I used it. The vehicles were loaded. The team was distributed between 2 MRAPs with the efficiency of people for whom this particular kind of leaving is practiced, who pack and load and check with the automatic economy of an action that has been performed enough times to evacuate its emotion, or at least the visible portion of it. Voss was at the lead vehicle. She saw me from 15 feet away and looked at me with an expression that was not warm, exactly. Not the warmth that gets called warmth. Something more specific. The look of a person who has noted you accurately and is confirming the notation before they move. She did not wave. She did not nod. She looked at me for 1 second in which I had the sensation of being read with the same attention she had given that briefing room at 0500, the same active stillness, and then she looked away and got in the vehicle. I stood there. Captain Guerrero appeared beside me, which I had not heard happen. "Where are they going?" I said. Not a question I expected her to answer. She didn't. She was watching the vehicle. Then, she said, "She'll do this 40 more times this year. She'll be in 40 more rooms full of men who see a chair in a corner." She paused. "And, in 40 rooms, she'll be the most important thing in them, and the rooms will take an hour to figure that out, or a day, or they never will." The lead vehicle began to move. Guerrero watched it. "She used to correct them," she said. "Early on. She'd spend the first hour of every room making sure the room understood what it was working with." She was quiet for a moment. Then, she stopped. "Told me once it was the most expensive habit she had." The vehicles passed through the gate. I watched the gate after they were gone. Guerrero left without saying anything else, which was consistent with her, which was its own kind of eloquence. At 2200, I sat on my bunk and opened my black notebook to a new page. I have a habit of writing the entry's date and then waiting. The waiting is not dramatic. It is the pause my professor taught me, the one beat, the beat that says, "That was the sentence. File it." Except I apply it to the blank page. I wait for the room of the page to tell me what it holds. I wrote, June 15th to 16th. She's gone. The cup is gone. The thumbtack is level now and I'm not sure I should have done that. She told me that rooms do their work on her whether or not they know what she is. She told me she stopped spending herself on rooms that haven't earned it. I have been in this business for 4 years and I have been noting rooms for 4 years and it never occurred to me that the room could also be spending you. That the act of being correctly seen is not a passive thing but a resource that depletes. That there is a cost to waiting. I don't know what I thought rooms cost. I thought they cost the observer. She let Holt put her in a wall and she picked up her cup and she put it on the sill and she waited for Calloway to call. She had already built the alternate route. She already knew something would move. She went back for Reyes in the dark and brought 14 people home and stood outside for 60 seconds with her face up and then came in and ran the debrief. The room at 0500 was wrong about her for an hour and 7 minutes. I was wrong about her for approximately that long. I noted her in the first minute, watching without watching. I underlined it. Then, I moved on. I should not have moved on. There is a sentence after this in my notebook that I wrote and then did not cross out. I am not going to reproduce it here. It is the sentence from the equipment staging area, the one she said, the one about rooms and what it costs to be wrong about you and how she reads them now. It is in the black notebook, in the box I drew around it, in the box that means, not for the official record. For the one that matters. I closed the notebook. I put it in my left cargo pocket. The right one holds my phone. The left one holds something that matters. I lay back on the bunk with my boots still on. Outside, FOB Darac was doing what FOB Darac does, machinery and motion and the continuity of operations that has no before and no after, only the persistent present tense of a place that does not stop for the things that have happened inside it. It was loud and it was purposeful and it was, in the way of all such places, completely indifferent to the fact that something had changed in the way I see rooms. I thought about her chest pocket. The touch she made before she walked to the birds. The 3 seconds of contact, not a check, just contact, with whatever she carries in there. I thought about 60 seconds with her face up. I thought about the alternate route she'd already built, standing next to the problem when it arrived. I thought about the room at 0500, and the woman in the corner who let the room be wrong about her, and what that cost, and how she spent that cost, and what she built with the savings. I thought about my professor in the Fergana Valley. The room tells you why. I have been telling myself, since this morning, that what happened over the last 36 hours at FOB Darac was the story of a room being wrong and, then, being corrected. A man making a mistake and encountering its consequence. A kind of justice, small and institutional and insufficient, but present. I do not think that is the story. I think the story is what it cost her to wait for the room to catch up. I think the story is what she carries in her chest pocket, and the 60 seconds she takes in the dark before she comes back in and runs the debrief, and the alternate route she builds in the first 5 minutes because something always moves, and the question is whether you've already decided what you'll do. I think the story is that she was in the room before any of them arrived. I think the story is that she will be in the room after. I think the story is that I almost missed it. I think about that. I keep thinking about that. End of Part 3. Lieutenant James Carver continued his assignment with Joint Task Force Kestrel for 11 more weeks. He filled 2 more notebooks. The official log for the period was later cited in a Joint Operations Review for its analytical precision. The personal log was not submitted. Commander Sarah Voss's operational record for that year contained 43 missions. Her fitness evaluation, filed in December, read the same as the previous year. The briefing room at FOB Darak was decommissioned 4 months later when the base reconfigured. All equipment was cleared. Whether the thumbtack was level when they cleared it, he did not go back to check. I keep a log. Not the official one that one gets sanitized, formatted, and submitted to men who will use it to write reports for men who will use it to brief other men who will file it somewhere air-conditioned and forget its existence entirely. I mean the other log. The black notebook I carry in my left cargo pocket, because the right one holds my phone and the left one needs to hold something that actually matters. I started the habit under a woman at DIA training who had spent 11 months embedded with a militia group in the Fergana Valley and who, on our first morning, told us the most important thing an intelligence analyst can do is record the unreportable. Not the data, she said, tapping the board once with one nail. The room. Learn to read a room the way a doctor reads a body, not what the patient tells you is wrong. What the body reveals without being asked. She had a specific way of pausing after she said something important. Just one beat. The pause that says, that was the sentence. File it. I filed it. I have been at FOB Darak for 6 weeks. I have filled 2.5 notebooks with rooms. The rooms of men preparing for things. The rooms of men pretending not to be afraid of things. The rooms where the pretending works and the rooms where it doesn't, where the body gives the game away in the bounce of a leg, the overmanagement of a coffee cup, the microsecond before a man laughs at a joke he does not find funny. This is the notebook that mattered. June 14, 0500 hours local. The briefing room in the command annex is a generous name for what is, structurally, 2 modular boxes bolted to each other by someone thinking about weight distribution and not at all about the humans who would live inside the result. It smells like boot leather and long-held grudges. The ventilation system's primary function is to distribute the heat evenly, which it does, with democratic commitment, to every corner. I arrived at 0450. Early entry is the only way to see a room as itself before the people arrive with their needs and their weight and their territorial arrangements. I got my coffee from the urn outside, which tasted like something you'd find at the bottom of a lake, and I found my corner. Back left. Angle on the door, angle on the whiteboard, angle on the window overlooking the motor pool. I opened my notebook. I began recording the room. Whiteboard, Major Rosales' handwriting. Arrows that connected to other arrows in the visual grammar of a man who thinks in systems. A satellite image pinned with 4 pushpins and 1 thumbtack that sat a degree higher than the others, which bothered me immediately and continued to bother me throughout the morning the way small wrongnesses do when you're trying to attend to larger ones. Chairs, 8 actual briefing chairs, for folding metal ones dragged in from somewhere else, arranged in a horseshoe facing the whiteboard. Occupied, 2. Marine Captain Guerrero, end of the table, reading the mission brief with the efficient attention of someone who has learned the brief will not match reality but reads it anyway, because not reading it would be a different kind of problem. And the DIA attaché whose name I never successfully captured, who was doing something on a phone held below the table with the practiced concealment of a man who has learned to perform official attention while conducting private business. And, in the far left corner, near the window, in the chair that was angled slightly differently from the others, angled outward, toward the room, a woman I had not expected and, therefore had not yet categorized. Khaki trousers. Olive drab fleece, worn to the texture of something lived in rather than purchased. No insignia. Hair back, functional. A paper cup of coffee balanced on her knee with the ease of long habit. A tablet in both hands, reading it with a quality of attention that looks, from the outside, exactly like stillness. It is not stillness. I know this now. What I mistook for stillness was, in fact, the specific and active discipline of a person who was watching a room while appearing to read a tablet. The two things are not incompatible. For certain people, they are the same thing. I noted her. 0500 woman. Corner. No insignia. Civilian contractor, probable. Stillness, unusual. Watching without watching. I underlined watching without watching. Then, I moved on, because Rosales had arrived and was beginning his pre-brief anxiety management, which involved rearranging papers that did not require rearrangement, and I needed to note that. I should not have moved on. Colonel Brandt Holt arrived at 0518. I have described what Holt does to a room to 3 different people since that morning, and I have failed 3 times to do it adequately, so let me try once more with the understanding that language is approximating something for which it was not designed. When Holt enters a room, the room becomes a room he is in. That's it. That is the whole description. It sounds like nothing and it is everything. He is 6'3", chest decorated in a way that signals a history of things that required decoration, and he carries his rank the way certain people carry family money, not as something they hold but as something that holds them, as a continuous, ambient condition of their existence that they stopped noticing years ago precisely because it never turns off. He came in talking. Not to someone. For the room. Generating the confident noise of plans and certainties, filling the available silence with the architecture of his own authority, and the men who came in behind him, his captain, a sergeant major, a contractor in a polo shirt, orbited him in the stable ellipses of practiced professional proximity. Told them the insertion window was not a negotiating point, the window is the window, you work inside the window or you don't work. He was at the table. Rosales adjusted the brief's opening to accommodate the new arrival. The room rearranged. Chairs shifted a degree. Postures adjusted. Faces oriented toward the new center of gravity with the small involuntary movements of things responding to a pull they weren't consulted about. He had not, in the 14 seconds since entering, looked at the woman in the corner. I had not taken my eyes off her. She had not moved. Cup on her knee. Tablet in her hands. But, the reading had stopped. I registered this in the quality of her gaze, which had shifted from the tablet's surface to the door, to Holt, and settled there with a look I could not decode cleanly. It was not calculation. Not caution. Something older than both. The look of a person encountering a specific kind of weather they have encountered before and have already, in the first 3 seconds, done their accounting for. I wrote nothing. The notebook was open. My pen was in my hand. Sometimes the room resists being written. The briefing ran for 22 minutes before anything happened. Joint op preparation. Command authority structure. Coordination seams between the SF element and the attached support team. Communications protocols and redundancies and the eternal question of what happens to the chain of command if the primary link breaks, which generated its customary amount of disagreement between men whose professional identity is contingent on being the primary link. Rosales managed it with the resigned calm of a man who has moderated this particular argument in this particular form in 8 different countries and has reached a philosophical plateau about it. I took notes I would later sanitize for the official log. The DIA attaché's right leg was bouncing under the table. Captain Guerrero had finished the brief and was watching Rosales with the clean attention of someone who has already formed their opinion and is now simply waiting for the room to catch up. Holt asked questions that were technically questions but were shaped, in their delivery, more like corrections. The question is reassertion of a position already held. The woman in the corner was still reading her tablet. Or appearing to. At 0537, Holt stood. He stood to reach the map on the folding table. The folding table was across the room. The woman in the corner was between Holt's current position and the folding table. I want to be precise about the next 4 seconds. I have tried to be precise about them in my notes and, in the accounting I do to myself at 2300 when I am lying with my boots still on because sleeping well enough to bother with boot removal is not something FOB Derek has offered me. 4 seconds. I have been over them many times. He moved toward the table. He did not look at her. She was seated. His arm was at the level of her shoulder. In the geometry of a 6'3" man reaching toward a surface past a seated woman, the space between his body and the table registered as navigable space. She was in navigable space. She was an obstacle in navigable space, and, when a certain kind of man encounters an obstacle in what he has decided is navigable space, he does not stop. He does not reroute. He moves through. His forearm caught her shoulder. She went into the wall. Not violently. This is the thing I have to keep rewriting into my notes, because the absence of violence in it is part of what made it the specific kind of wrong that it was. Violence has a script. A room knows what to do with violence, there are protocols, there are words, there is a sequence of responses that arrives automatically and carries the situation somewhere. There is no protocol for the particular erasure that is carelessness. For the person-shaped obstacle in the path that was not imagined to contain persons. The room reached for its script and found the page missing, and so the room went quiet in the way rooms go quiet when they are trying to locate a response they have not yet developed. She hit the wall. Her cup hit the floor. She stayed where she was put. Holt retrieved the map. The map was laminated. It had red grid lines on it. He looked at it. Then, he looked at her, with the expression of a man who has walked into a table and is completing the social transaction of acknowledging the table. Sorry, he said. The word with the shape of a period, not an inquiry. She looked at him. That's silence. I have crossed it out in my notebook 3 times. The silence was not anger. Not humiliation. Not the silence that precedes confrontation or the silence that absorbs a blow and holds it for later. It was the silence of a person who has been inside this specific interaction, the details varying, the essential architecture identical enough times to have developed a complete relationship with it. Not resignation. Not acceptance. Something more deliberate than either. The silence of, this is what the room is offering right now. I have recorded the offering. I will file it where it belongs. She bent and picked up the cup. Looked at it. Set it on the windowsill with the specific care of someone shelving something fragile, except the cup was already empty, except it had already been on the floor. She sat back down. Holt turned back to the table. At 0607, the door opened. Chief Petty Officer. Full kit. SEAL Team designation on the shoulder patch, face carrying the particular blankness of professional focus, the look that is not the absence of thought but the presence of thought that has been stripped of all decoration. He did not scan the room for its most visibly authoritative figure. He said, Commander. Calloway says the birds are staged. Nobody moved. Not immediately. The room was doing something in the pause that was not quite understanding and was not quite confusion but was somewhere in the space between them, the cognitive territory a room occupies when it is revising itself in real time. The woman in the corner stood up from the folding chair. She was not tall. I have written this in my notebook and then stared at it because the observation seems like it should be inconsequential and is not. She stood, and she was medium height, and nothing about her physical presence announced anything. She was not impressive in the way that gets called impressive in the rooms I have been inhabiting for 6 weeks. She was not large. She did not project. She stood the way certain things stand that have made a complete decision about themselves and do not need the exterior world to confirm it. Like a load-bearing wall. Which does not announce that it is load-bearing. It just holds. Tell Calloway 2 minutes, she said. Her voice was sized for the room. Exactly sized. Not larger. Yes, ma'am. The CPO withdrew. She looked at the room then, not at any person in it but at the room as a system, as a mechanism she was responsible for, and, she said, in the same calibrated voice, we'll confirm command authority before we exit. Colonel Holt, I'll need your team's roster verified. The silence was the third different kind that morning. I have categorized them in my notebook. Silence 1, the ordinary quiet between briefing speakers. Silence 2, the room reaching for a script it did not have. Silence 3, a room that has been operating under a misapprehension for an hour and 7 minutes being informed, without preamble or decoration, of its error. Silence 3 has a specific acoustic quality. A specific texture. It is the silence of things being recalibrated in real time, the silence of a room that does not know yet whether to be embarrassed or whether the institutional training to suppress embarrassment will arrive in time, which it usually does, which is one of the things that make institutions function and one of the things that make them dangerous. I watched Colonel Holt's face. I watched a man encounter a data point that does not fit the model he has been running. I watched the model strain. Watched him do the thing that men trained like Holt are very good at doing, the accommodation without the acknowledgement of the accommodation. The filing of new information in the correct drawer, rapidly, without any external indication that the drawer needed relabeling. He looked at her. He looked at the door where the CPO had been. He looked at his captain, who had found something of genuine interest on his tablet. "Commander," he said. The word carrying the weight of a complete recalibration compressed into 2 syllables. Acknowledgement as adjustment as the performance of an ease being constructed in real time. She looked at him for one moment. "The roster," she said. She picked up her tablet. She walked to the door. She did not look at the windowsill. She did not need to look at anything she had already seen. Holt left behind her. His captain at the appropriate interval. I heard them in the corridor through the modular wall. The captain said something I couldn't retrieve. Holt's response arrived clearly: operational authority is operational authority. Fine. A pause that held the specific weight of a man editing his own memory. Then, would have been better if the brief had been better coordinated. I wrote it down. Verbatim. It is a complete sentence. No pronouns. No reference to a specific event or a specific person. It locates the failure of the last hour in the abstraction of coordination, in the systemic gap between briefing and reality, in a space where no one specific is responsible and, therefore, no one specific is wrong. One of the cleanest pieces of real-time self-editing I have recorded in 2.5 notebooks. Filed under Hallway is confessional. Captain Guerrero was the last to stand. She closed her folder. Picked up her cover. And glanced, as she moved toward the door, at the windowsill where the empty cup sat. She almost smiled. I want to be specific about that almost smile. It was not the smile of pleasure at another person's discomfort. Not the smile of a reversal savored. It was the smile, small, visible only because I was at the exact right angle of a person seeing something confirmed that they have been holding for a long time without the means to confirm it. The smile for being right about a costly thing. She caught me watching. "You're the analyst," she said. "Yes, ma'am." She measured me for a moment. The professional assessment, not hostile, not warm. Just accurate. "Make sure," she said, "you're writing this down." She left. I looked at my notebook. 6 lines on the page I'd started at 0500. None of them the right lines. I learned her name the way I learn most things, from the margins. The sergeant major who'd come in with Holt, speaking in the corridor to the DIA attaché at a volume intended for conversational privacy and not calibrated for modular construction, that's Voss. 2 words. An entire hour's reconfiguration in 2 syllables, delivered in the tone of a man informing another man of something he should already have known. The tone itself carrying the meaning, yes. That one. File accordingly. I looked her up at 0930 on the JSOC roster I was authorized to query for an adjacent purpose. Her file took 4 minutes to locate and something between 10 seconds and considerably longer to finish reading. Commander Sarah Voss. United States Navy. SEAL Development Pipeline, first female officer to complete it. The file uses the word complete once and does not return to the history of what preceded completion, because the file is a record and not a story, and records contain outcomes and not the architecture of what was survived to produce them. 3 deployments. 2 operational command tours. 1 classified tour whose dates I can read but whose content is a column of access level restrictions, a wall of redaction that is itself informative. A commendation that exists as a presence, it is there, the commendation, but elaborates nothing about what it was for, in the way that the most significant decorations often elaborate nothing. Her most recent fitness evaluation. Final paragraph. 1 sentence. Commander Voss requires no elaboration. I copied it into my notebook. Word for word. Put a box around it. The kind of box you put around things when you don't know yet why they matter, but, with the same certainty that tells you a thumbtack is wrong, that they will. At 22:10 that night I walked past the command annex on my way back from the comms tent. The briefing room was empty and dark. Through the small window beside the door, in the ambient light from the compound perimeter, I could see the windowsill. The cup was still there. I stood outside the door for a moment. I don't know exactly what I was waiting for. Additional information, maybe. Some final confirmation of a thing I could not yet name. The room had given me everything it was going to give me, and it was still not the right shape. I wrote in my log before I tried to sleep, she was in the room before any of them. She will be in the room after. The cup is still on the sill and I don't know why I needed to check. I noted her at 0500 and moved on. I should not have moved on. I saw her. I did not see her. I am still trying to understand whether those are the same thing. The TLC smells like ionized air and old coffee and the specific anxiety of people who are about to watch something happen that they cannot stop. I have been in tactical operations centers 5 times now. Each one has this smell. It is not a smell that has a name exactly, it lives in the olfactory space between voltage and adrenaline and the particular fear of the person whose job is to watch rather than to act, who must sit with their hands on a keyboard and do the administrative work of a crisis from behind plexiglass while other people go into the dark. The TOC at FOB Darak was a long room divided by function. Left side, comms, 6 operators in various states of professional tension, headsets on, screens running the green geometry of real-time surveillance. Center, the command table with the operational map overlaid on a lightboard, updated every 6 minutes with the latest drone feed. Right side, my section. Intelligence support. Me, a terminal, a printer I had already sworn at twice, and a set of headphones connected to the audio feed of the operation, which I was authorized to monitor for real-time analysis and forbidden to speak into unless directly addressed. I had a notebook. I always have a notebook. I held my pen over it for most of the night and wrote almost nothing, which is not because there was nothing to write. It is because some things are heavier than I know how to put down. The team staged at 20:45. I watched them through the TOC's exterior window, which overlooked the staging area, a concrete pad with helicopter landing markings and a fuel rig and the organized chaos of people making final checks on equipment that will need to work in places that will not be organized and will not be lit and will not offer second attempts. 14 operators. Plus the attached elements, a combat controller, a trauma medic, 2 interpreters who were carrying the specific expression of people who have made peace with a decision they are still not entirely sure was wise. The birds were staged. 2 MH-60s at the far end, rotors in the low idle that is the pre-flight whisper before the thing becomes a machine. I watched Voss move through the staging area. She was in kit now, which changes most people. Kit is its own kind of statement, the weight of it, the completeness of it, the way putting it on transforms the wearer into a version of themselves with all the civilian ambiguity removed. Most people look more serious in kit. Some people look more fragile. Voss looked neither more serious nor more fragile. She looked identical. Which is to say that the kit had not added anything and had not subtracted anything, because what she brought to the room at 0500 in a surplus fleece and khaki trousers was already the same thing she brought to the staging area at 2045 in full combat load. She was doing equipment checks. Methodical. Unhurried. She reached each operator and said something I couldn't hear through the glass, and each operator responded with whatever their body did, a nod, a brief exchange, the small adjustments people make when someone whose opinion matters to them is paying attention. She stopped at the end of the line. She was facing away from the TOC. I was watching her back, which was not the informative angle. But I saw for 3 seconds, maybe 4, her right hand move to her chest. Not to her radio. Not to her kit plate. Lower. The breast pocket of her uniform. She touched something in that pocket. The touch was not a check, it was not the touch of a person verifying that an item is present. It was the touch of a person making contact with something. Briefly. Once. Then, her hand was back at her side. She turned and walked toward the birds. I wrote in my notebook, chest pocket. Not a check. Contact. Underlined it. Filed it under the growing category I had labeled, at the top of a page, without yet fully understanding why, what she carries. The operation's name was not a name I was cleared to use. I am going to call it the extraction, which is accurate and also incomplete and is, in that imprecision, probably as close to the truth as the official name. There was a man. An interpreter. A man who had worked with American forces for 4 years and who had, at some point in the last 8 months, stopped being available, which in the operational language of this region means one of two things and only one of them involves him being alive. The intelligence community had, over those 8 months, gradually accumulated enough evidence to suggest that he was alive, that he was being held by a militia faction approximately 40 kilometers north of our position, and that the window for viable extraction had been narrowing steadily since March. The window was now. My role in the extraction was intelligence support, specifically, real-time analysis of any incoming signals, intelligence or imagery during the operation, flagged immediately up the chain if I identified anything that changed the operational picture. In 8 hours of mission planning and 3 hours of pre-op briefings, I had been told 3 times that my information would be time-critical, twice that I was not to interpret beyond my remit, and, once, by Major Rosales, in a tone that suggested he was saying something he'd been asked not to say, if you see something that doesn't add up. Say it. I wrote it in my notebook. At 21:07, the birds went dark and lifted. The TOC went to work. For 40 minutes, the operation was a picture of everything working the way it is designed to work, which is always the period in any operation that I trust least. Insertion clean. LZ cold. The team moved in the drone feed as green thermal signatures, disciplined columns of heat moving through dark country with the practiced efficiency of people who have done this specific kind of moving many times before. Comms were clear. The patrol route progressed without contact. The interpreter at the target compound, confirmed present by a thermal pattern consistent with the intelligence profile, was in the western structure as predicted. I was watching my screen. And taking notes, and my right hand was doing the analytical work and my left hand was flat on the desk, and I realized at some point around the 40-minute mark, watching my left hand the way you watch something you were not sure about. The way you watch a thing that seems fine and that you cannot stop checking. My hands on a desk. Not in a compound 40 kilometers north. Making no difference to anything in the dark. This is the part of the job I have not yet found a way to be philosophical about. At 21:49, I found something. The signals packet had come in at 21:40 and I had queued it in the standard analysis pipeline and it was processing and I was watching other screens and then I looked back and there was a pattern in the traffic data that was wrong. Not dramatically wrong. Subtly wrong. The kind of wrong that only announces itself as wrong if you have been sitting in corners noting rooms long enough to know what the room sounds like when something in it is off. The militia's internal comms had spiked 17 minutes ago. Not the spike of an operation, smaller than that, shorter-lived, the spike of a response to received information. Someone had received something at 21:32. Someone had told someone. The spike had localized to a position 200 meters northwest of the target compound. 200 meters northwest. The extraction route ran northwest. I flagged it. In the 3 seconds between seeing it and flagging it, I had the full-body experience of hoping I was wrong, which is a sensation that lives precisely at the intersection of professional certainty and personal cowardice, and which I have felt before but never at this frequency. The flag went to the comms officer. The comms officer patched it to the operation. 22 seconds of silence on the audio feed. Then, Voss, copy. Alternate route, Alpha sequence. Callaway, confirm. Callaway confirmed. I noted, 2149, she had already built the alternate route. She had already built it. The alternate route existed before I called it in, because she had looked at the map the way I look at rooms and she had noted the wrong thing, the off thing, the thing that other planners had not allocated concern for, and she had filed it under if, and when the if arrived she moved to it without having to construct it from nothing. I thought about the briefing room. The thumbtack that wasn't level. The corner she chose. She reads rooms too. She just reads different ones. The contact came at 22:04. I heard it as sound through my headset, not gunfire, which I could identify by then, but the specific clipped change in radio traffic that is the auditory translation of people adapting to a situation that has adapted to them first. 3 voices, overlapping briefly. The medic's call sign. A grid. Someone was hurt. Not dead. The radio voice that reported it had the flat, controlled quality of a person who has trained the panic out of their voice and is operating on what's left, and what was left did not have the specific weight of terminal information. Someone was hurt. Down, not gone. In the TOC, the atmosphere changed. Not dramatically, this is one of the things that distinguishes professionals from civilians in crisis, the ability to hold the room's temperature steady while the room is on fire, but I felt it. The quality of attention in the room increased and narrowed, the way focus does when the thing you were attending to in the abstract becomes the thing that is actually happening. I watched the drone feed. Green signatures. Moving. One slower than the others, supported. And then, Voss's voice on the audio, which I want to record accurately because I have written it in my notebook 5 times and I want to get it right. Lima element, hold position. I am coming back to your grid. Do not move him without me. A pause. Her call sign again, all elements, we are taking the long route. Nobody gets left behind in the accounting. Nobody gets left behind in the accounting. Not in the field. In the accounting. The operational math that says, one extraction compromised is an acceptable margin, pull the primary element, advance the mission. She was not pulling the primary element. She was revising the math in real time, rewriting the equation so that the acceptable margin was not a person on her team, was never a person on her team, which I later learned was not a deviation from her standard but the definition of it. The long route was 40 minutes of higher exposure. She chose it. Without apparent hesitation and, without the quality of bravado that is sometimes mistaken for decisiveness, there was no performance in her voice, no swelling of it, no signal that she knew she was being listened to by a room full of people who would remember this. She said it the same way she'd said tell Callaway 2 minutes. Sized for the room. Exactly sized. I looked at my left hand on the desk. I looked at the drone feed. I kept the audio channel open and took no notes for 40 minutes. Just held the headset. Just listened. They came back at 0127. I heard the birds before I saw them on the perimeter feed, the sound change as the rotors shifted frequency in the approach, the particular pitch that means the weight is coming down. I was still at my terminal. My coffee had been cold for 2 hours. The printer I'd sworn it had, at 2340, begun making a new noise that I'd chosen not to investigate because there was nothing I could do about it and I had enough wrong noises occupying my attention. The TLC had shifted to extraction processing mode, which meant the room's function was changing from monitoring to receiving, and the people in it were making the physical adjustments of that shift, some standing, some moving, the comms operators checking and rechecking the medical staging area's readiness, which was located adjacent to the landing pad and which I could see through the exterior window. I watched them come off the bird. The hurt operator, Petty Officer Reyes, I learned his name later, I always learn the names later, after the need for the name has already passed, was ambulatory, which means he could walk and did, with one arm across the medic's shoulders and the other held close. His face was the particular blankness of a person in managed pain, the face you construct when you need to look like you are fine because being fine is required, and you will deal with the real accounting of it later, privately, when no one needs anything from you. Voss came off the bird last. The team command structure puts the commander last off a bird and first into one. There is a logic to it, a logic of exposure and accountability, the person most responsible going in first and coming out last, the calculus of risk taken personally rather than delegated. She came off last and she was already talking to the sergeant major before her feet hit the pad, and the conversation had the efficiency of two people who share enough operational language to conduct a complex exchange in 40 words and a gesture. The team dispersed. Medical. Equipment staging. The 100 small administrative functions of a returned element. The TOC was already shifting into debrief preparation mode. I was watching the landing pad through the window. Voss had stopped walking. She was standing at the edge of the pad, on the side closest to the perimeter fence, where the compound's ambient light thinned to the dark edge of the installation. Not talking to anyone. Not being talked to. Just standing. Face up. The position of a person looking at the sky, except there was nothing particular in the sky, no moon, no significant stars, just the pre-dawn darkened, the distant perimeter lighting and the sound of the birds powering down behind her. She was still for 60 seconds. I counted. I was not supposed to be at the window. I was supposed to be at my terminal, processing the operational intel from the night into the preliminary report that would inform the debrief. I was supposed to be typing. My hands were at my sides. I watched her stand in the dark for 60 seconds with her face up. I could not tell you what she was doing. I do not know the word for it. It was not prayer, at least not the kind of prayer that has been named and packaged and submitted to the official record. It was something that belongs to people who have sent other people into darkness and brought them back and must do the private accounting of what that costs, and the accounting must be done outside, in the real dark, before the operational machinery reconvenes and the official record resumes and the space for the private accounting closes. 60 seconds. Then, she turned and walked back in. Inside, the debrief prep was underway. I returned to my terminal. I began the preliminary report. The sentences came out clean and sequential and said what needed to be said in the language that official documents require, which is not the language of rooms or of left hands on desks or of 60 seconds with your face to the dark. Sergeant Major Okafor appeared at my section. He needed me to verify a grid coordinate from the signals packet for the debrief record. I pulled it up. We cross-referenced. He thanked me, which is a thing that does not always happen, and turned to leave. Then, he turned back. You called that traffic pattern, he said. Yes, Sergeant Major. He looked at me for a moment. The professional assessment, same kind as Guerrero's. And then, he said something I have thought about since, something I wrote in my notebook that night after I was released from the TOZ and went to my bunk and lay on it without removing my boots. He said, she built that alternate route in the first 5 minutes of the mission brief. Knew something would move. Always does. He paused. Seen a lot of commanders. Most of them wait for the problem. She's already standing next to the problem when it arrives. I wrote it down. Then, I wrote the question I didn't ask him, the one that had been in the room since 0500 that morning. How many rooms has she had to be already standing in before anyone stopped to ask how she got there? I passed by the staging area at 0345, on my way to the comms tent to transmit the preliminary report. Voss was doing an equipment debrief with 2 of her team members, a post-op systems review, the methodical accounting of what worked and what requires attention before the next evolution. The conversation was quiet and technical and had the texture of a long professional relationship, dense with shared reference, efficient, each exchange assuming a context that didn't need to be rebuilt. I was going to walk past. She looked up. Analyst, she said. Not my name. I was not sure she knew my name. I am not sure the distinction mattered. Yes, Commander. The traffic flag at 2149. I waited. Good call, she said. 2 words. sized for the space between us, which was not large. Then, she looked back at her team member and resumed. I went to the comms tent. I transmitted the preliminary report. I stood outside for a moment in the pre-dawn cooling of the air, which at FOB Darak has a specific quality, the desert giving back some portion of the heat it has been accumulating all day, releasing it into a sky that has briefly turned approachable. I thought about the chest pocket. The touch she had made, 3 seconds, before she walked to the birds. I thought about the 60 seconds with her face up. I thought about the alternate route she had built in the first 5 minutes of the mission brief, standing next to the problem before the problem had arrived. I wrote in my notebook, standing outside the comms tent at 0403 in a temperature that was almost comfortable for the first time since I'd arrived, she carries something in that pocket. She carries a lot of things we don't have access codes for. I watched her bring 14 people home in the dark and stand outside for 60 seconds afterward and then come back in and run a debrief. I watched Holt need a room to arrange itself around him before he could function. I watched her function before the room knew she was in it. I am still writing down the things I should have seen first. I think I will be writing them for a long time.